He hadn't heard the house this quiet since the day she died, but it wasn't the kind of silence that empties a room. It was the kind that holds something sacred, something waiting. And when Edward Turner stepped through that door, he didn't hear voices. He heard a whisper that would change everything. The elevator doors opened to the top floor of the West Village penthouse. Edward stepped in, phone to his ear, half-finished conversation fading into static. The deal in San Diego had closed early. For once, he didn't stay for dinner, drinks, or delay. He just wanted to go home. He expected noise. His boys were 6. Noise was normal. He expected cartoons echoing from the living room, socks on the staircase, one twin yelling, the other laughing. That kind of chaos. But the moment he stepped inside, he knew. Something was different. No footsteps, no voices, just stillness. He set his bag down slowly, called out once, "Jordan? Justin?" Nothing. The kitchen was spotless, the balcony untouched, the hallway too quiet. He started moving faster. He wasn't the panicking type, but his chest tightened. Where were they? Then a sound, faint, gentle, a voice, not loud, but steady. He followed it down the hall, to the last door on the left. He turned the handle, not knowing what to expect, but not this. He stopped, because there they were, his sons, kneeling on the carpet, eyes closed, hands folded, and beside them, Rachel. She wasn't cleaning. She wasn't trying to impress. She was praying. Not loud, not for show, just real. Her voice was soft, steady, holy, and his boys were listening. Jordan whispered, "Thank you, God, for helping me not feel so mad today." Justin added, "Thank you for Rachel, and please let Daddy stay home more." Edward's throat closed. He didn't move. Couldn't. Because this stillness, this peace, this presence, he didn't build it. She did. He was a man who had built towers across continents, owned more homes than he could count. But in this quiet room, he realized he had never truly built a home. And for the first time since they buried Claire, Edward Turner cried. Not for the business deals, not for the headlines, but for the life he never stayed long enough to see. He remembered something Claire once said. "They don't need more things, Ed. They need more of you." But he had buried himself in boardrooms and left 2 little boys alone with their grief. Until someone came along who didn't try to fix them. She just stayed. Before we go any further, if this already stirred something in you, if you've ever needed someone to stay, or if you've ever been that person for someone else, click subscribe, share this story with someone who needs hope today, and tell us where in the world you're watching from. May this story remind you, God still sends people, not always to preach. Sometimes, just to sit, to listen, and to love. The ones who stay are often the ones he sends. Edward didn't knock, didn't pause. He just stepped inside and closed the door behind him. The weight of the day still sat on his shoulders, but the quiet stopped him before he could take another step. He stood there for a moment, listening, waiting, but there was nothing. No arguing, no footsteps, no voices calling his name. He set his keys down slowly. Something felt wrong, but not in a loud way. It was the kind of wrong you feel in your chest, not your ears. He called once, "Jordan?" Then again, "Justin?" Still nothing. He moved through the apartment, 1 room at a time. Each one still. Each one untouched. His breathing changed. Not fast, just careful. Then he heard it. A voice. Quiet, calm, somewhere deeper in the home. He followed it, not rushing but drawn. And when he stepped through the last doorway, he didn't speak. His boys were on the floor, heads bowed, eyes closed. And beside them, Rachel. She wasn't cleaning, wasn't organizing. She was speaking softly, her words gentle but sure. And the boys, they were listening. One of them whispered, "Thank you for helping me feel better today." The other said, "Thank you for Rachel. Please help my dad stay." That's when Edward stopped breathing. Not for long, just long enough to feel it all land at once. He leaned against the wall, not because he was tired, but because something inside him had given way. This wasn't something money could build. This wasn't something he asked for. But somehow, it was here. A moment he didn't plan for. A woman he barely noticed. And two boys who were learning how to hope again. Rachel finished the prayer with a single word, "Amen." And the room stayed quiet. But it wasn't empty. It felt full. Full of something he'd forgotten existed. Peace. Not the kind you buy. Not the kind you schedule. The kind that comes when someone chooses to stay. He stepped back without a sound. Found a seat in the next room. Sat down. Covered his face with both hands. No one saw him cry. But he did. And he knew exactly why. He'd been gone for a long time. Not in miles. In presence. He thought work was the sacrifice. But it was his children who paid the price. And somehow, through it all, a woman he didn't even look at twice had stayed long enough to notice what he missed. She didn't fix them. She didn't replace their mother. She just stayed. And in that staying, something holy had begun. There was a time this home held music. Not loud. Just enough to say, "Someone is living here." Claire used to hum while brushing the boys' hair. Sunday mornings smelled like pancakes. Friday nights sounded like laughter echoing through open windows. But all of that ended quietly. There was no great collapse. No dramatic scene. Just a phone call. A diagnosis. And then time started slipping away faster than anyone could hold it. Claire passed on a cold morning in March. The boys were 4. Too young to understand why their mother stopped coming into their room at night. Too old to forget the sound of her voice. Edward buried her with shaking hands and a silent jaw. He stood at the graveside, looking every bit the man people expected, tailored coat, stillness in his eyes. But something inside him had gone numb. He thought grief would be loud, but it wasn't. It was silent, and that silence crept into everything. The house changed first. Pillows stayed perfectly placed. Dishes were washed before they ever had the chance to dry. The twins' artwork was taken off the fridge without anyone noticing. What was once warm became controlled. Clean. Predictable. Safe. Edward called it stability. He told himself the boys needed structure, that if the routine stayed tight, the chaos inside them wouldn't grow. But it did. Jordan started breaking things. Books, toys, rules. Justin stopped talking when he got upset. Just curled into corners and went quiet. They didn't ask about their mother anymore. Not out loud. But every night, Jordan left the closet light on. And every morning, Justin set an extra bowl at the table. Always for her. The nannies came and went. One after another. Some left without saying goodbye. Some left notes on the counter that said things like, "I'm not trained for this," or "They need more than I can give." Edward barely blinked. He just called the agency again. Raised the salary offer. Tightened the job description. He stayed gone more. Europe, Tokyo, back-to-back deals. Each trip felt easier than coming home to a silence he couldn't fix. At night, he lay in hotel beds and convinced himself he was doing what a good father would do. Provide, protect, keep moving forward. Grief didn't have room on the calendar. He couldn't afford to fall apart. So he didn't. And the boys, they learned to stop reaching. They didn't cry anymore. Not in front of him. They just fought with each other or sat in front of screens until their eyes turned dull. Claire's mother, Margaret, called often in the beginning. She tried to help. Tried to say things like, "They need to see you, not your assistant." But Edward had already built walls around his pain. He didn't know how to open them without breaking. Then one Tuesday afternoon, the agency called. Said they had someone available. No resume on file. Just someone who'd helped with emergency placements before. Her name was Rachel Ross, 29. No degree. No references. Just a quiet voice on the other end of the line who said, I'm willing. Edward didn't ask questions. He didn't care if she stayed a day or a week. When she showed up, she wore jeans, carried one small bag, and had a notebook tucked under her arm. She said, "Good afternoon." He didn't even look up, just pointed toward the hallway and said, "Start wherever it's worst." She nodded. He left for the airport the next morning. He didn't ask what the boys thought of her, didn't leave instructions, didn't expect much. He'd stopped believing anyone would last. But by the end of that week, he would start to notice something he hadn't seen in a long time. The boys weren't yelling. The house wasn't perfect. But the silence had changed. It wasn't cold anymore. It felt softer. He didn't know it yet. But something had begun. Not with a miracle, not with a plan. Just a quiet woman who showed up and didn't leave. The first day was rough. Rachel didn't expect a warm welcome, but she wasn't prepared for the silence either. The kind that doesn't just fill the room, it holds a warning. The boys watched her. Not with curiosity, with distance. Jordan dropped a full cup of juice on the kitchen floor, then looked her straight in the eye. "I'm not cleaning that," he said. Rachel didn't blink. She knelt down, picked up the shards of ice, and wiped the spill with a dish towel. "You don't have to," she said gently. "I'll take care of it." He didn't respond. He just walked off, leaving his wet socks behind. Justin was quieter but colder. When Rachel left her phone on the counter to rinse dishes, it disappeared. She found it later under the bathroom sink, wrapped in tissue paper, the screen still on. She didn't say a word. She just folded the tissue, turned the phone off, and set it back on the charger. By bedtime, they hadn't said more than a few words to her, and she hadn't forced any. That night, as they crawled into their separate beds across the room, she stayed by the door. "I'll leave the light on," she said softly. "I'm not far." Justin rolled away from her. Jordan pulled the covers up over his head. Rachel turned the light low and stood still for a moment, not waiting for a thank you, just waiting long enough to be sure they were okay. She stepped out and closed the door behind her. It would have been easy to quit, to call the agency and say, "It's not working." But she'd seen this before. In other homes, in other children, pain doesn't always cry out. Sometimes it hides behind slammed doors and cruel jokes. Sometimes it spills juice on purpose just to see who stays behind to clean it up. And Rachel, she was the staying kind. The next morning, Jordan walked past her without looking. She offered him breakfast. He didn't respond. But 10 minutes later, the plate was empty. That afternoon, Justin slammed the door to his room so hard it bounced back open. She didn't chase him, just waited until he came out, red-eyed and quiet. He dropped a crumpled drawing on the floor. She picked it up after he walked away. It was a sketch of a woman, hair tied back, hands open. No smile, just eyes that looked like they'd been watching for a long time. There were no words on the page. But she understood. On the third night, it rained. Jordan refused to sleep in his own bed. Justin kept getting up to check the hallway. Rachel didn't send them back. She just pulled their mattresses closer, laid a blanket across both beds, and sat between them on the floor. She told them a story about two bear cubs who lost their mother in a storm and how they stayed close to survive the winter. It wasn't fancy. Her voice wasn't dramatic, just steady. Jordan pretended not to listen, but his fists unclenched. Justin didn't speak, but when she reached for the edge of his blanket, he didn't pull away. Before she stood up, she looked at them and said quietly, "You can yell, you can hide, you can even hate me, but I'm not going anywhere." Neither of them replied. She turned off the light, and just before the door closed behind her, she heard a whisper. It was Jordan. "What happens to the bears in the spring?" Rachel didn't answer right away. She came back to the bed, leaned down, and whispered, "They find a new path, together." He didn't ask anything else, but he left the closet light off that night. By the end of the week, something had shifted. Not loudly, just enough to notice. Justin placed a napkin beside her tea one morning. Jordan handed her a broken toy and said, "Can you fix it?" She didn't try to win them over. She didn't bribe or threaten. She just kept showing up. And somehow, they began to believe her. It didn't happen all at once. There were no grand breakthroughs, no sudden hugs, just the slow, careful shifting of the air around them. The house stayed quiet, but not the kind of quiet that felt abandoned. This was different. The boys still kept to themselves most days. But now, when Rachel entered a room, they didn't leave. They just watched, waited. Some mornings, Jordan would already be sitting at the table when she brought out breakfast. Justin started lining up his crayons by color, small patterns, in a world that felt like it never made sense after she died. Rachel noticed everything. Not in a loud way. She just paid attention. Jordan hated loud noises. So, on stormy nights, she sang under her breath while folding laundry, just loud enough for him to hear from his room. Justin needed routine. So she taped a tiny paper schedule above his bed, hand-drawn pictures, breakfast, play, rest, prayer, sleep. He never said thank you, but he looked at it every night. She never forced conversation. She didn't try to fix what was broken. She just made space for it. One day, Jordan came home from school with a drawing. A house with 3 windows, 2 stick figures in the middle, a third off to the side, a small heart drawn over her chest. He left it on the kitchen counter and never brought it up again. But the next morning, it was taped to the fridge. Rachel didn't ask who made it. She didn't need to. Justin had nightmares. She found him sitting on the stairs one night, blanket around his shoulders, eyes wide and wet. She sat down 2 steps below him, not facing him, just close enough. Neither of them spoke. She just stayed. After a while, he leaned his head on her shoulder. Not for long. Just long enough for something to settle. Rachel had a notebook she wrote in every night. It wasn't fancy, just a brown leather journal she kept near her bed. Sometimes, she wrote with the door cracked. Other times, she took it into the kitchen and sat by the window when the house was asleep. One night, she forgot to bring it back to her room. She left it on the couch, tucked under a blanket. In the morning, it was gone. She didn't ask where it went. Didn't panic. She just waited. Later that evening, when she turned down the covers, she found it tucked neatly under her pillow. No note, no explanation, but she smiled because she knew exactly whose hands had returned it. Edward started noticing the small things. The way the hallway smelled like cinnamon again. The way the fridge had magnets with words like hope and stay rearranged into tiny prayers. He still worked long hours, still left before sunrise some days, but the silence he returned to no longer felt sharp. It felt softer. He wasn't sure what was changing. He didn't ask. But once, as he passed by the boys' room, he saw Rachel braiding Jordan's hair while Justin counted out Lego bricks beside her. He stood there for a while, not watching, not listening, just there. It had been a long time since that was enough. One evening, the boys asked Rachel to say grace before dinner. She hesitated, not because she didn't want to, but because it felt holy. Like too much had changed too quickly. Like maybe this was more than just a routine now. She folded her hands, closed her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, "for food, for breath, for the strength to keep going, and for the love that knows how to wait." When she opened her eyes, both boys were watching her, not smiling, not crying, just holding her in their gaze like she had become part of something they couldn't name yet, but were finally starting to believe in again. The house wasn't healed. Not yet. But it was no longer broken in silence. Now it was healing in stillness. And sometimes that's even more sacred. It was just past 7 when Edward came home early. No meeting ran late. No flight delayed. He just didn't want to be anywhere else. It wasn't a decision, he announced. He simply told his assistant to clear his evening and closed his laptop without finishing the email. The elevator doors opened. He stepped inside. The air felt different. Not lighter, just more alive. He didn't say anything when he walked in. No one rushed to greet him, and he didn't expect them to. But there were sounds, real ones. A drawer opening. Laughter, small, honest. Someone humming off-key down the hall. He followed the sound without thinking. And there she was, Rachel, sitting on the floor of the boys' room, legs crossed, a pair of tiny socks in her lap. Justin lay on his stomach nearby, coloring in a book. Jordan was standing in front of her, still as stone, while she gently parted his hair and began to braid. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was just there, present. Edward stood in the doorway and watched. He didn't say her name, didn't interrupt, just listened. Jordan was talking now, not loudly, but freely, telling her about a dream he had, something about flying, about seeing his mom. Rachel nodded, but didn't fill the silence. She just let him talk, let the weight settle where it needed to. Edward leaned against the doorframe, something building in his chest. Not sadness exactly, more like recognition. He was watching someone love his children in a way he didn't know how to anymore. Not with gifts, not with promises, but with patience, time, stillness. That kind of love couldn't be bought. It had to be given, and she had given it quietly, fully, without ever asking for anything back. Later that night, after the boys had gone to bed, Edward lingered in the kitchen. Rachel came in slowly, holding a mug with both hands. She looked surprised to see him still there. "I made tea," she said softly. "Mint. Helps me sleep." He nodded. "I used to drink tea," he said. "Claire loved chamomile." Rachel smiled faintly, but didn't say anything. The silence sat between them, not cold, not awkward, just real. He spoke again, slower now. "They talk to you." Her eyes lifted, curious. He continued, "My boys, they talk to you. They tell you things they won't tell anyone else, not even me." Rachel looked down at her mug, hands wrapped around it like a shield. "I don't ask them to," she said. "I just listen." That answer hit deeper than he expected, because he realized somewhere inside him he had stopped listening a long time ago. The next morning, he made breakfast. It wasn't perfect. The eggs stuck to the pan. The toast was burnt. But he was there. Justin looked surprised when he saw him in the kitchen. Jordan just blinked, like he was waiting for the punchline. "You're cooking?" Jordan asked. Edward gave a crooked smile. "Trying." They sat down together. 3 plates. 1 scorched piece of toast. No one said much. But the silence wasn't tense. It was full. Rachel entered a few minutes later, still in her house sweater, notebook under her arm. She paused when she saw the scene, father, sons, food between them. Edward looked up. "There's tea in the pot," he said quietly. "I wasn't sure if it was your kind." She walked to the counter, poured a cup, took the seat farthest from him but still in the room. Justin passed her the sugar. Jordan leaned his head on her arm for a moment, then went back to his eggs. And Edward, he didn't miss it this time. He saw it. All of it. What they'd been trying to build without him. What she had been holding together, with 2 steady hands and no expectation. Later that day, Edward found himself opening an old journal. Claire had bought it for him years ago. He never used it. Until now. He sat by the window, pen in hand. And for the first time in what felt like years, he wrote something down. 1 sentence. "I think I'm ready to come home." Margaret showed up unannounced, just after lunch, wearing the kind of silence that meant she'd already made up her mind. Rachel opened the door. "Mrs. Turner," she said softly. "Margaret," the older woman replied. She walked in without waiting for an invitation. Edward wasn't home. The boys were watching a nature documentary, sprawled across the couch like it was their safe place. Margaret barely glanced at them. She turned to Rachel. "Let's talk, somewhere private." Rachel hesitated, then led her to the sunroom, the quietest space in the house. Margaret sat down, unbuttoned her coat, crossed one leg over the other. She didn't smile. "I've been watching," she said, "from a distance. You've lasted longer than most." Rachel didn't respond. Margaret continued, "I'm not here to criticize. You've done fine. The boys are calmer. My son looks less hollow." A pause. Then her voice sharpened just slightly. "But let's be clear, this is not your family." Rachel's hands stayed in her lap. "I never said it was," she replied. Margaret opened her bag, pulled out a white envelope, and placed it on the table between them. Inside was a check, $250,000. Signed. No conditions, no paperwork. You leave quietly. You start fresh wherever you'd like. Rachel didn't look at it. "Why now?" she asked. Margaret folded her hands. "Because I see what's happening, and I know how these stories end. My grandchildren don't need confusion, and my son doesn't need charity mistaken for love." Rachel stayed still. "Charity?" she asked softly. Margaret leaned in. "Don't misunderstand. You've done well. You've filled a gap. But some roles aren't meant to last. This isn't about feelings. It's about what's appropriate." The word landed like a stone. Rachel didn't argue, didn't plead. She just breathed steady and deep. She stood. "I'll pack my things this evening," she said. Margaret gave a satisfied nod. But Rachel wasn't done. "I didn't stay for Edward," she added. "I stayed for the boys, because someone needed to." Then she turned and walked away, quietly, with grace. She didn't take the envelope. She left it untouched on the table. That night, after the boys had gone to bed, Rachel moved slowly through the house. She didn't make a sound. She folded her clothes into a single suitcase, taped a note to the fridge. "Thank you for letting me love them." Then she went to their room. She didn't wake them. She just stood at the foot of their beds for a long time, watching, praying. She left one note on each pillow. "I love you. I'm sorry. Don't stop praying." And just before sunrise, she was gone. Edward came home to silence, the kind that felt wrong again. No soft humming, no open journal on the couch, no signs of Rachel. At first, he thought maybe she was upstairs, or out for groceries. But the longer he searched, the heavier his chest became. Then he saw the note on the fridge, and his knees gave just slightly. He walked into the boys' room. Jordan was sitting up in bed, holding the paper, eyes red. Justin wouldn't speak. He just stared at the wall, clutching Rachel's notebook to his chest. "She's gone," Jordan said. Edward didn't know what to say. "I didn't say goodbye," Jordan whispered. Justin finally spoke, voice cracked and low. "You let her leave." Edward's throat burned. He sat down on the floor beside them. "I didn't know," he said. "I didn't know she was leaving." But even he could hear it in his own voice. The guilt. He looked at the boys. The ache on their faces. The way they folded inward like something steady had been pulled from under them. "She didn't say goodbye to me," Justin said. "But she left this." He handed Edward a small note, folded in half. It wasn't addressed to him. Just a single sentence. "Stay soft, even when it hurts." Edward held it for a long time. Then he stood, went to the kitchen, picked up the untouched envelope and stared at the name on the check. His mother's. He grabbed his keys. He didn't slam the door. He just walked out and drove. The house felt colder, not in temperature but in spirit, like something had been poured out, and no one knew how to put it back. Edward walked through the kitchen that morning with his coat still on, keys in hand, unsure why he hadn't already left for work. He poured coffee, didn't drink it. The cup sat on the counter all day, full, untouched. The boys didn't come downstairs right away. When they did, they didn't speak. Jordan stared at his cereal like it might answer a question he couldn't form. Justin didn't touch his plate. The silence stretched longer than usual. Not peaceful, not quiet, just hollow. Rachel's absence wasn't loud. It was everywhere. Her shoes were gone from the front mat. The scent of cinnamon no longer floated from the oven. The couch looked untouched, like no one had dared to sit where she used to fold laundry with her knees tucked underneath her. That evening, Edward found Justin in the laundry room, holding one of her cardigans. He didn't speak, just held it to his chest like a question. Jordan was the first to crack. It was the second night. He walked into the hallway and slammed his fist against the wall. Once, twice. A picture frame fell. Glass shattered. Edward rushed out of the bedroom. Found him breathing hard, knuckles scraped red. "She left," Jordan snapped, voice shaking. "She left just like everyone else." Edward moved closer. Not to correct him, just to be near. "She didn't say goodbye." "I know. You let her go." Edward swallowed hard. "I didn't know she was going to leave." Jordan wiped his face with the sleeve of his shirt. "You should have known." Justin shut down. He stopped speaking for almost 2 days. He slept in Rachel's room, on top of the blanket, fully dressed, as if he was guarding something invisible. When Edward asked if he was okay, he nodded once, but didn't look up. When he asked if he wanted anything, Justin shook his head, then curled toward the pillow. Edward stood in the doorway for a long time that night, not knowing whether to step in or stay back, not knowing what to say, only knowing that silence had returned. But this time, it hurt more than ever. He called the agency, asked if they had her forwarding address. They didn't. She hadn't left one. He checked her room for clues. Found nothing. Just a book on the nightstand, a folded blanket, and 3 small rocks lined up on the windowsill, one for each of the boys, she used to say. Only now, there were 2. He picked up the third. It had a smiley face drawn on it in red crayon. Justin's doing. He held the stone in his hand for a long time. Then he slipped it into his pocket and walked out the door. His mother answered on the second ring. "Edward, did you speak to her?" There was a pause. "I did." "You gave her money to leave?" "I gave her a way out. One she wouldn't take, by the way. She wasn't supposed to." Margaret's voice tightened. "She was a maid, Edward. She did her part. You got too close." He didn't argue, didn't yell, didn't try to explain the nights she sat by his son's door, humming through storms. Didn't tell her how Rachel prayed with them, not as a performance, but as someone who believed God was still listening. He just said the one thing that felt true. She was the only one still holding us together. And then he hung up. That night, Edward sat at the edge of his bed. Notebook open, pen still. He stared at the blank page, unsure of how to begin. Then, slowly, he wrote one sentence. She stayed long enough to see them. "I didn't." He went to the study, opened the drawer where the agency kept emergency records, found the intake form. Rachel's handwriting filled most of the page clean, unhurried, like she didn't expect anyone to read it. Next of kin, Aunt Miriam Ross. Location, Jackson, Mississippi. He stared at it, then closed the drawer. He didn't call for a car. He didn't pack a suitcase. Not yet. Instead, he walked into the boys' room. Both were asleep, tear stains still faint on their faces. He knelt between their beds, rested a hand on each of their blankets. Then he whispered, "We're going to find her." Edward didn't sleep. He sat at the kitchen table until the sky turned from black to grey, the boys' breakfast plates still untouched in the sink. The silence wasn't cruel this time, just full of questions. When the boys woke, they came downstairs in wrinkled pajamas, their faces puffy from sleep and something heavier. They didn't ask where she was, but they looked. Justin checked the hallway. Jordan glanced toward the sunroom, and Edward watched it all like someone seeing in color again after a long time in the dark. He poured orange juice into 2 glasses. Sat down. "I found something," he said quietly. They looked up. "She once wrote down an address, Mississippi." Justin's eyes blinked fast. Jordan sat straighter. "She's there?" he asked. "I don't know," Edward said, "but we're going to find out." The road was long. 14 hours, 2 backpacks, 1 sketchbook, and a glove box full of snacks that no one really ate. They took the rental. Edward didn't want to bring the town car. This wasn't a trip for comfort. It was a trip for truth. Jordan sat in the back with his headphones in, not playing music, just needing space. Justin kept Rachel's notebook in his lap, the whole drive. He traced the edges with his fingers like it might disappear if he let go. Edward drove. Not rushed, not distracted, present. That's what this was now, not a journey away from pain, but a drive towards something that might still be waiting. "Somewhere along the border of Tennessee," Jordan asked. "What if she doesn't want us anymore?" Edward didn't answer right away. He pulled off at a rest stop, turned off the engine, and looked at both boys. "If she doesn't want us," he said slowly, "we'll sit on her porch until she changes her mind." Justin's lip trembled. "Even if it takes all day?" he asked. Edward nodded. "Even if it takes forever." They arrived in Jackson under a sky that looked like it had been weeping earlier that morning. The address led them to a quiet neighborhood, wide porches, worn fences, curtains pulled half shut. They knocked on the door. A woman answered, older, soft voice, eyes like Rachel's. "You're the Turners," she said gently. "Yes," Edward replied. "We're looking for Rachel." She didn't smile. Didn't open the door wider. "She's not here." Jordan's shoulders dropped. Justin looked down at his shoes. But then she added, "She's at church." Edward blinked. "What church?" The woman gave a small nod toward the end of the road. "Second chapel. Red doors. She goes most mornings. She prays there." She paused. Sometimes for herself. Sometimes for others. They parked in front of the chapel. A small building with weathered stone and stained glass windows that caught the light like stories waiting to be told. The boys got out first. Edward followed, heart pounding like it hadn't in years. The doors creaked when they opened them. Inside, it was still. Wooden pews. Candlelight. The faint sound of a voice familiar. They walked slowly, steps soft against the floor. And there she was, kneeling near the front, head bowed, notebook open beside her. She didn't hear them at first, but the moment she turned, Justin ran. "Rachel!" She looked up, eyes wide, then full. Tears welled before her body could even react. Jordan was already beside her. And then they were in her arms, two boys who had traveled across miles just to return to the place that felt like home. She held them tight. No words, just the kind of embrace that heals more than explanations ever could. Edward stood back, watching the moment unfold. His hands were trembling. Rachel looked up at him. He walked forward. Not as a man used to having the final word. Not as their employer. Just a father, with nothing left to prove. "I don't know what this is supposed to be," he said softly. "But I know this, we're not a family without you." Rachel looked at him, searching his eyes for something real. And what she found was a man who had finally come home. They stayed in that chapel for a long time. No rushing, no next steps. Just breath. And presence. And when they finally left, the boys walked on either side of her, hands linked, eyes quiet with peace. The drive back wouldn't be fast. The pain wouldn't disappear overnight. But they weren't lost anymore. And now, they weren't going back to the same house. They were going back to rebuild a home. They didn't rush back into life. After the drive home, Rachel stayed at a hotel for a few nights. Not because she needed distance, but because healing shouldn't feel forced. Edward didn't pressure her. The boys didn't beg. They just waited. And on the third morning, Rachel rang the doorbell. Not with luggage, just with her notebook in one hand and banana bread in the other. She walked in like someone coming back to something unfinished. Not something owed. The house wasn't the same. Edward had made changes. Subtle, but they were there. Work calls now ended by 5. Weekends were blocked off in red ink. He kept a seat open beside him at the table, not for a guest, but for someone who was part of the story now. Rachel didn't become a nanny, or a partner, or a fill-in for anyone lost. She was just Rachel, the woman who stayed long enough to soften what grief had hardened. And somehow, that was more than enough. The boys began to bloom in slow, quiet ways. Jordan started drawing again. Sketches taped to the fridge, buildings, birds, a figure with her hair pulled back. Justin began humming in the hallway. Old gospel melodies, just fragments, but they came without prompting. One night, Edward found both boys in the kitchen, cutting hearts out of construction paper. He asked what it was for. Justin looked up. "We're making a welcome back party," he said. "For Rachel?" Edward asked. Jordan shrugged. "For us," he said. "So, we remember this time." On the first snowy evening of December, Edward made dinner. burned the chicken, overcooked the rice. But the table was full. Laughter echoed, and the warmth wasn't coming from the oven. After the boys went to bed, he found Rachel on the back porch, wrapped in a blanket, looking out at the street below. Quiet, calm, still the same. He stood beside her. "I still don't know how you did it," he said. She didn't look at him. "Did what?" "Stayed," he replied. She paused. "I didn't stay because it was easy," she said. "I stayed because they needed someone who wouldn't walk away." He nodded. "And me?" Rachel looked over now, not with judgment, but with clarity. "You needed someone to remind you. You were still a father." That truth hit soft, but deep. Edward reached into his pocket, pulled out a small ring, silver, nothing flashy. "I don't want to rebuild what I lost," he said quietly. "I want to build something new, with you, with them." Rachel looked down at the ring, then at his face. Her eyes filled, not from surprise, but from knowing what it had cost him to mean those words. She didn't speak right away. She just nodded once. Not yes, just "I'm here." And somehow, that was even better. Christmas morning came, with burnt toast and wrapping paper everywhere. The boys opened their gifts too fast. Rachel made cinnamon rolls. Edward wore an apron. No one let him live down. But the real gift was the room itself. Full. Not of decorations, but of presence. Of peace that had been fought for. Of love that had stayed long enough to be believed. Later that afternoon, Edward sat down with his journal. The same one Claire once gave him, still mostly empty. But today, he wrote, without hesitation. It wasn't the house that needed fixing. It was the hearts inside it. And the woman who taught us how to stay, taught us how to heal. He closed the book, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was trying to catch up to life. He was already in it. Not every wound was gone. Not every memory came easy. But the silence in the house no longer felt like loss. It felt like peace. Not perfect, but real. And in the center of it all was love. The kind that holds on. The kind that doesn't need a title. The kind that builds a home